The hardest thing in the world isn't losing what you love. It's realizing you've been living in a lie, one carefully constructed, disguised by the people closest to you. I didn't just lose my empire that day. I lost my identity, my trust, my family. They called it an accident. I called it murder. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening. The world was shifting into winter. The air had the kind of sharpness that made you long for warmth, and the city lights of Shanghai gleamed like liquid gold in the distance. I had just closed a deal worth millions. We were going to expand our holdings in the finance sector, a risky but high-return move. And I was proud. I was ready. But that evening was the last time I would ever feel in control. I was in my study when I received a call, a familiar voice. "Lian, my love, I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice smooth, laced with the charm he had perfected over the years. Lian was the kind of man who made you believe in dreams. Until he didn't. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but your father had an accident. They're saying it's critical. You need to come to the hospital." I didn't question it. I didn't hesitate. I rushed to the car, fear gripping my chest, and I didn't look back. The hospital was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of disinfectant. Lian was already there, speaking with doctors, flashing his signature smile to the staff. My father, Xiaojian, the patriarch of the Lin family, was lying unconscious in a bed surrounded by machines. But it wasn't the hospital room that made my blood freeze. It was the look in Lian's eyes. There was no concern. No worry. Only relief. "Is he going to be okay?" I whispered. "Of course," Lian replied, his voice smooth but distant. He stepped closer, and I caught the faintest flash of something in his eyes. Triumph. I looked at him, confusion spreading through my veins. And then it happened. The door to my father's room opened. A woman stepped in. My stepmother, Ming Wei. Lian smiled. And I knew. They had planned this together. The business, the empire, the inheritance. It was all slipping away from me. I spent the next few hours in shock, unable to process what was happening around me. Ming Wei, Lian, and even my younger brother, who had always been quiet, obedient, were now whispering in hushed tones. And I knew. I was no longer part of the family's future. The moment I stepped out of the hospital room, I was pulled into the most dramatic scene of my life. A man approached me. An attorney. A man I didn't recognize. "Ms. Lin, I regret to inform you that your father's will was amended 2 days ago. As of now, the majority of his estate, including the family holdings, have been transferred to your stepmother and her children." I stopped breathing. What? How? I was his only legitimate child. I had worked beside him, built his empire. And now they were taking it all from me. Just like that. Lian stood behind me, and I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just my husband anymore. He was my captor, the man who had been plotting against me for years. I don't remember much after that. The darkness, the numbness, the shock. But when I woke up, everything had changed. I was in my childhood home, alone. My father's seat at the head of the table was empty. The walls were cold, silent. I had died. The old me, the naive, trusting woman, the one who believed in family, loyalty, and love. And in that moment, I made a vow. I would rise again, not as the woman they thought was beaten, but as the one who would take back what was mine. I went into hiding. No one knew where I was for 2 years. During that time, I built the empire they thought they had stolen from me. I studied the market, the business, and the assets that were rightfully mine. I learned the weak spots in the companies. I learned the corruption in my family's finances. I learned everything. Then I started buying back shares. I took back properties. I liquidated assets that Ming Wei and Lian had been funneling into shell companies. And when I finally revealed myself to the world, the Lin family was shocked. I didn't just take back the Lin Corporation. I made them call me Madam. When I walked into the boardroom, where my stepmother and Lian had assumed they were the undisputed rulers, I wasn't some victim. I was their leader. I said nothing as I sat at the head of the table. I let the silence stretch, letting my power radiate through the room. "You've done well to destroy everything I built," I said coldly. "But now, I'm taking it all back." Lian's face turned white. Ming Wei's hands trembled as she reached for a glass of water. And that's when I made the first move. I restructured the company. I took back control of every major asset. I ousted Lian as CEO. I didn't just win back my family's empire. I made them beg for my forgiveness. And from that moment forward, they were my employees. When you're fighting for your birthright, you don't play fair. You don't play nice. And you never, ever let your enemies know when you've won. For a long time, I'd believed that power could be earned with hard work, with loyalty, and with trust. But when everything I loved was stolen from me, I realized the truth. Power is about control. The moment I walked into that boardroom and made them call me madam, I didn't just reclaim the empire. I set the rules. And for the first time in my life, I was the one who was in charge. When I sat in that room, staring across at Ming Wei, Lian, and the silent investors who had placed their bets on their version of the future, I didn't speak at first. Instead, I watched them. Ming Wei's once steely composure had cracked. She was no longer the elegant stepmother who seemed to command the room with a simple glance. Her trembling hands betrayed her fear. She was a woman who had once felt untouchable, but now her empire was crumbling. Lian, the man who had been my rock, my partner, was now a shadow of the smooth-talking fraud I had married. His jaw clenched, his eyes darting toward Ming Wei as though waiting for some kind of direction. His betrayal had stung me, but I knew that my true vengeance would be in the slow, suffocating suffocation of his ambitions. "Madam Lin," I said, breaking the silence with a cool, controlled voice, "I see you've tried to erase my name, erase my legacy. But you forgot one thing." I leaned forward, my fingers lightly grazing the table. The Lin family was never about a name. It was about the heart of this company, the people who built it from the ground up. And now, it's mine to restore. Their collective silence told me what I needed to know. They were reeling. I'd never been a fan of corporate politics. But I had learned. The first step was simple: own the shares. Damien's arrogance had left him blind. He believed that because the majority of the company's stock was controlled by Ming Wei and their network of loyalists, I had no chance of regaining power. He was wrong. What they didn't know was that I had quietly bought back shares over the course of the past 2 years. Small purchases, fractional pieces of influence. Each stock purchase had been stealthy, methodical. Just a whisper in the market, just enough to make them notice me when I walked back into the room. But the true game changer came when I used my family's original shares, ones that had been secretly left behind in trust under my father's will. They were legally tied to me as the rightful heir, and while they were hidden, they were never truly out of my control. I had them certified, reissued, and I used them as leverage. I called an emergency shareholder meeting. The boardroom was filled with tension as I walked in, my high heels echoing through the sterile, polished floor. Every seat was filled with a face I once considered family, men and women who had trusted me to lead them. Now, they were all on the other side. The first question was expected. "Madam Lin, we understand your desire to regain control, but what guarantees can you give us that you can restore the family's empire?" I smiled. A slow, cold smile. Guarantees. The Lin family was never about guarantees. It was about vision, about creating value. "I don't need to give you guarantees because I am the guarantee." I could see their hesitation, but it didn't matter. The vote was inevitable. I controlled the majority, and I was going to make sure it stayed that way. I had prepared for everything, except for one thing. One person who wasn't part of the original equation: Jiang Tao. Jiang Tao was the one executive who had always been on the fringes, a brilliant CFO who had been quietly observing the downfall of the company while trying to keep his own position intact. I had always assumed he was loyal to Ming Wei, but when the vote came down to the final moments, Zhang Tao surprised me. He stood up, his voice calm but steady. I believe that Madame Lin's vision is the only path forward. I vote in favor of her control. Ming Wei's face twisted with disbelief, but the numbers were in my favor. The shareholders who had been loyal to Damien and Ming Wei were now questioning their own investments. The doubt was too much for them to ignore. It was a massacre of votes. The day after the shareholder vote, I called a meeting with the executive team. This time, the energy was different, fear and respect intertwined. They knew who the true leader of this empire was now. I needed information. I needed control of the heart of the empire. The finances. Zhang Tao, I said, turning to him, I need you to give me the full financial breakdown. Not just the reports. I want the true ledger, the off-the-books accounts, the hidden investments. He nodded, understanding the weight of my words. But what I found in the reports shocked me. And secret accounts in Cayman Islands. Offshore trusts linked to shell companies designed to launder money. And a substantial portion of the company's funds siphoned off into a private account under Ming Wei's name, her personal fortune. It was clear now. They had planned to bleed the company dry, leaving me with nothing. But now, the game was mine. I didn't waste time. I called for a full audit of the company's offshore investments. I brought in top-tier forensic accountants to trace the money and shut down every illicit operation. I leaked the information to the press about the corruption in the Lin family's business dealings. By morning, the headlines were already spreading. I didn't care about the consequences. I cared about making them pay for what they had done. I sent Lian a final message. I don't just take back what's mine. I take back everything. This empire was built on my blood, and I will make them call me Madam. He didn't respond. I didn't expect him to. 2 months later, the Lin Corporation was unrecognizable. The executive board was restructured, key players loyal to Ming Wei were replaced, and the company was financially stabilized. My role was no longer in question. I was the Madam, the leader. And the family who had tried to steal my inheritance? They were reduced to whispers in the halls of their own empire. I didn't just take back my birthright. I built a new future. Revenge, at its finest, isn't loud. It doesn't scream or break things. It doesn't shout from rooftops. Revenge is a calculated silence. When my father built the Lin Empire, he did it with strategy. Every financial decision, every move made, was designed to protect us from external forces, and internal ones. He trusted no one, not even family. That was the power I inherited. I didn't need to shout to be heard. I needed only to expose the fragile, hidden threads my in-laws had woven into the empire they thought was theirs, and I would break them silently, one strand at a time. When I inherited the Lin family's holdings, I wasn't just handed a set of luxury cars and penthouses. I inherited secrets, corruption, and a network of financial traps that extended far beyond the company's official balance sheet. The first thing I did was audit the company. And I didn't just look at the surface. I dug through the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the investments in dark corners where no one dared to look. I was relentless, using a team of experts who weren't afraid to go further than the law required. I wanted to know everything. And what I found was stunning. There were 5 key offshore accounts, all linked to shell companies spread across tax havens like the Cayman Islands and the British Virgin Islands. I traced the money, bit by bit, as it flowed through layers of fictitious entities designed to obscure its true destination. One shell company, tied to Ming Wei's name, had siphoned $250 million from the Lin Corporation's internal reserves into a private bank in Luxembourg. This wasn't just embezzlement. It was an overt takeover of the company's wealth, designed to drain the lifeblood of the empire while keeping everything clean on the books. The most insidious part of this scheme was Lian, my estranged husband, once the man I had trusted. When I first started looking into the financial documents, I assumed Ming Wei had orchestrated everything. But as I dug deeper, I uncovered a more troubling truth. Lian was involved in everything. Lian had been funneling company money into real estate ventures that didn't exist. He had his hands in every pot, cryptocurrency investments disguised as high-risk ventures, corporate bonds he had issued to shadow companies, all designed to make him untouchable. But what he didn't know was that every dollar he thought was hidden was waiting for me to find it. Once I understood the magnitude of the problem, I knew what I had to do. I needed to expose the financial misdeeds to the right people, but at the same time, I had to ensure I was the one pulling the strings. This wasn't about getting revenge. This was about reclaiming control of the empire that was rightfully mine. I used my position as CEO of the Lin Corporation to call for a high-stakes board meeting. This wasn't just a formality. This was the beginning of the silent war. At the meeting, I didn't talk much. I let the numbers speak for themselves. I handed out printouts of the offshore accounts, detailing how much money had been drained. The silence in the room was suffocating. No one spoke. The board members knew something was wrong, but they had never expected it to come from within. I turned to Ming Wei first. "How long were you planning to hide this, Ming Wei?" "Long enough to drain what was left of my father's empire." Her face went pale. Her lips trembled as she reached for a glass of water. I don't know what you mean." I didn't give her the satisfaction of answering. Instead, I turned to Lian. "Lian, do you have anything to say for yourself?" He stared at the document in front of him, his face flushed. His voice was a strained whisper. "Brielle, you don't understand. It was never about the money. I was just trying to keep everything afloat. For you, for us." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But then, as I watched him squirm in his chair, the full weight of his betrayal crashed over me. He hadn't been trying to save the company. He had been trying to steal it. I had already prepared for this moment. As the board members whispered, uncertain, I pulled up a new report on the screen. It was an internal audit of Lian's dealings, a spreadsheet detailing every penny he had diverted from the company. I had also been working behind the scenes with my legal team. They had compiled video footage of meetings where Lian and Ming Wei had conspired against me, discussing how to legally take me out of the company without anyone knowing. "Ming Wei, Lian," I said, my voice hard as steel. "You've tried to bury me. You've tried to steal everything that was mine, and for a while it worked. But now, it's over." I hit send. And the video was live, broadcasted to the boardroom, the press, and every shareholder in the Lin Corporation. They couldn't hide. They couldn't lie. They were exposed. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, Lian was fired from his position as Chief Strategy Officer, and Ming Wei was removed from her position as Chief Operations Officer, and their names were removed from the board of the Lin Corporation. The empire was no longer theirs, but this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. Now, I controlled the board. I had the shares. I had the leverage. The company was mine to rebuild, and I was going to do it my way. I called for a new board meeting, one that would set the tone for the future. But this time, I was in complete control. We're going to rebuild this empire. From the ground up. The Lin Corporation will be a beacon of innovation, not corruption. I will make sure of it. The board members, now firmly under my command, agreed. I was unstoppable. As the days passed, I began restructuring. I started by putting everything under strict oversight. Every account, every business venture, was monitored by a team of forensic auditors. I cut ties with anyone connected to Ming Wei and Lian's network. I started investing in ethical ventures, in renewable energy, and sustainable business practices. The Lin Corporation would become a leader in corporate responsibility. Not only would I regain the money stolen from me, but I would make sure it was used for good. And I would do it without the weight of betrayal on my shoulders. In the world of business, they say you must always look forward, but sometimes looking back is just as important, because the ghosts of your past are always waiting to come for you. As I sat in the expansive corner office of the Lin Corporation's headquarters, looking out over the skyline of Shanghai, I knew that I had taken back more than just a business. I had reclaimed my family's legacy, my dignity, and most importantly, my power. But the journey was far from over, because nothing is more dangerous than a woman who has everything to lose and nothing left to fear. The shareholders had voted, the board had been rearranged, and yet, a quiet doubt remained. The empire I had inherited was crumbling, not just because of financial mismanagement, but because of the trust that had been broken. Trust, once fractured, is hard to repair, and I had to rebuild it, brick by brick. I called a meeting with the top executives. These were the people who had been loyal to Ming Wei and Lian, the ones who had turned a blind eye to the corruption, the ones who had betrayed me by enabling their ambitions. They filed into the room one by one. I sat at the head of the table, a quiet storm in my eyes. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone had their fingers crossed that I'd fail. But failure wasn't an option for me anymore. I took a deep breath and broke the silence. I didn't inherit this company to let it become a shadow of itself. I inherited it because I believe in its potential, but that means we have to redefine what success looks like. We're no longer just about luxury. We're about innovation, transparency, and integrity. The executives exchanged uncertain glances, their skepticism hanging in the air, but I didn't back down. I pressed forward. Your loyalty is now to this company, not to people who were only out for their own gain. I took the first step in clearing out the rot. I restructured. I appointed new heads of departments, people who were loyal to the company and had no history with Ming Wei or Lian's network. People who believed in the future of Lin Corporation, not in legacy fraud or stagnant growth. Even though I had full control over the internal workings of the company, the public perception was still a looming shadow over my reign. The media had been circling like vultures. They didn't care about the future of Lin Corporation. They cared about the drama, the scandal, and the personal vendettas. But I wasn't going to be their puppet. I called in a PR strategist I trusted. His name was Xiao Yang, a former political campaign strategist who had built his career on transforming disgraced figures into icons of strength. We mapped out a public relations strategy that would not only restore the Lin Corporation's reputation, but also position me as a trailblazer in the industry. The campaign was simple: rebuild the brand from the ground up, and focus on corporate responsibility, ethical practices, and sustainability, and create a narrative where the empire's rebirth wasn't just about revenge. It was about resilience. The first step was an interview. Xiao Yang arranged for me to appear on Shanghai's leading business network, where I would discuss my vision for the future of Lin Corporation. The interview was set to be live, so there would be no room for manipulation or editing. It was my chance to tell the world who I truly was. The night before the interview, I sat alone in my hotel suite, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I was calm. I was composed. But beneath that calm exterior was a fire that I knew I had to channel. When I walked into the interview room, the host, Wang Ji, greeted me warmly. But I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He wasn't sure what kind of woman he was about to interview. A disgruntled wife? A woman seeking revenge? But by the time I was done, he, and the world, would see me for who I truly was. Madam Lin, Wang Ji began, your family's company was once the epitome of success in China. Yet, after your father's passing, many questioned the direction of the company. What will you do to restore its reputation? I took a deep breath, leaning slightly forward. The cameras flashed, and I could feel the weight of the moment. Reputation isn't something you restore by merely changing the narrative. It's earned. I don't need to erase the past, I need to learn from it. And that's exactly what I'm doing. Lin Corporation will lead in ethical business. We will be a beacon of transparency, a leader in innovation, and most importantly, we will empower the people who make our success possible, our employees, our partners, and our clients. It was the first step in reclaiming my place in the public eye. I wasn't just the woman they tried to bury. I was the future. Just as things began to settle internally and my PR campaign gained traction, an unexpected challenge reared its head. I received an anonymous email. It was short, direct. You think you've won, Madam Lin, but you haven't seen the full extent of what we've prepared. We're coming for your empire. You will fall, and when you do, we'll be there to claim what's ours. I smiled to myself. The in-laws were making their move. It was a calculated risk, one that Ming Wei and Lian were willing to take. They had underestimated me, thinking that my hunger for revenge would cloud my judgment. But now, they would see what happens when you push a woman to the brink of losing everything. I would outsmart them at every turn. The next few weeks were critical. I knew my enemies would make their play. I needed to strengthen my position, both internally and externally. I started reaching out to industry insiders, people who had once been loyal to my father, but had grown wary during the last few years of Ming Wei and Lian's corruption. I formed strategic alliances with other business magnates and old family friends who had seen through my in-laws' schemes. They didn't care about the drama. They cared about stability and growth. By targeting key stakeholders and offering them a seat at the table, I reinforced my position as the rightful heir to the Lin Empire. They now saw me not just as a leader, but as a visionary capable of restoring the empire to its former glory. But the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. I had started something bigger than myself. I had started a movement, a revolution within the Lin Corporation, but the silent war against Ming Wei and Lian was still raging. I could feel their eyes on me, everywhere. I wasn't safe, not yet, but that was the thrill of it. The game had just begun. I had made it clear, the Lin Empire was mine to command, and anyone who thought otherwise had no place in my future. But that didn't mean I was done. It was far from over. The final blow was coming. The end of a legacy built on lies, and the beginning of something only I could control. I had spent years learning, planning, and biding my time. The empire was now at my fingertips, but there were hidden forces still lurking in the dark. They'd never thought I would rise again. They'd never thought I could dismantle their empire, brick by brick. But now, it was time to unmask the truth and expose their darkest secrets. It started quietly. Lian had been careful. Too careful, actually. For weeks, I didn't hear from him. Ming Wei, too, had fallen silent, retreating into her self-imposed seclusion. I knew they weren't done. They were plotting something. They had to be. I could feel it. The emptiness that surrounded their quietude. It wasn't fear, but a calm before the storm. They were gathering their final moves. They had one last card to play. But they didn't realize they were playing with fire. The truth was that Lian and Ming Wei's empire hadn't crumbled. It had merely gone underground. They had set up shell companies, operating in foreign markets to launder money. They were trying to hide behind international laws, avoiding the Chinese authorities who were sniffing around. The more I dug into their financials, the more I realized how deeply they had buried themselves in layers of deception. And that's when I discovered the key to their undoing. Lian had made a critical error. He left a trail of breadcrumbs in one of his private accounts, and it led straight to the Cayman Islands. For months, I had been investigating the secondary shell accounts I had uncovered during the initial audit, but this one was different. This one wasn't just a small transaction. It was a massive transfer of funds that had been siphoned off from the company's core investments. I took the information to my legal team. We worked tirelessly to connect the dots, tracing each account back to Lian and Ming Wei. But the final piece of the puzzle came when I found a single name in a confidential business report. Yu Jinhai, a notorious businessman with connections in the Cayman Islands, known for his involvement in illicit financial dealings. Yu Jinhai was their middleman, the final link between the shell companies and the stolen funds. But what they didn't know was that I had already planted my own inside source within Jinhai's organization, a low-level accountant who was loyal to no one but the highest bidder. I didn't just want to expose them, I wanted to destroy their foundation. To do that, I needed to make sure they came to me. I couldn't chase them anymore. They had to chase their own mistakes. I arranged a fake business merger meeting, using a high-profile international law firm to act as the intermediary. The merger would be between a fictitious tech company I had created on paper with a shadow board and one of Ming Wei's last profitable investments. The game was set. The trap was baited. I let Jinhai's people believe they had everything under control, while I slowly fed them information that would make them believe the merger was legitimate. I even made sure to send confidential documents with key financial figures from the Lin Corporation. These were calculated leaks, carefully chosen to lure them into a false sense of security. They bit. They took the bait. I set the date for the final confrontation, October 13th, the same day my father had died. When I walked into the meeting, the atmosphere was tense. Lian and Ming Wei were both there, standing beside Yu Jinhai, who was now more nervous than ever. They didn't know yet what was about to happen. I had already secured all their accounts, downloaded their financial files, and prepared a full dossier of their illicit dealings. But I didn't speak, not immediately. I let them talk. I let them continue weaving their lies, presenting documents that made it seem like everything was still above board. Finally, I stood. Lian. Ming Wei. I see you've been busy. They froze. Lian's hand gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. What do you mean, Brielle? He asked, his voice shaking. You've been busy laundering money, hiding it in offshore accounts, betraying the very company my father built. And I have all the proof right here. I threw the files onto the table. The room was silent. Then, I pressed play on a video recording. It was a conversation between Lian and Yu Jinhai, recorded from one of my trusted insiders. Lian's voice was clear. I'll send the funds. Just make sure the accounts are ready in Cayman. The Lin assets will be ours. I watched as Ming Wei's face drained of color, and Lian's eyes shifted nervously. This is a mistake, Brielle, Ming Wei said, her voice thin, trying to regain control. You don't understand the bigger picture. This was all for the company. I smiled. It was a smile of quiet satisfaction. No. This was for you. For your own pockets. For your greed. You thought you could leave me with nothing, but instead you've given me everything. The room was suffocating in its silence as I made my final move. The assets are being frozen as we speak. Every account you tried to hide in the shadows? I have them all. The media already knows about your connection with Jinhai. The authorities will be here in minutes. Ming Wei collapsed into her chair. Lian's face turned ashen. The empire they had tried so hard to steal from me? It was already in my hands. And then, I watched as they were carted away. Not just in shame, but in full public disgrace. The police arrived. The media followed. I didn't even flinch. I knew what I had done. I knew what I had taken back. With Ming Wei and Lian removed from the picture, the Lin Corporation was now completely in my hands. I didn't just rebuild the company, I transformed it. I turned the Lin Corporation into a global leader in sustainable technology, a company that would thrive for generations. But I wasn't done yet. I didn't just want to build an empire. I wanted to ensure it would never fall into the wrong hands again. I started the process of legal reforms, putting safeguards in place to prevent anyone from ever abusing the company again. I wasn't just the CEO, I was the queen. And I would make sure no one would ever try to take my empire from me again. Power doesn't come from a title. It doesn't come from the boardroom. And it doesn't come from public opinion. Power comes from the ability to define your own future and make everyone else accept it. When I took back the Lin Corporation, I didn't just reclaim what was mine. I rebuilt the entire foundation, stronger and more resilient than it had ever been. But there was one thing I knew for certain. In order to keep it, I had to ensure no one could ever take it from me again. The Lin Empire was more than just a company. It was a legacy, a dynasty. And if I wanted to secure it, I needed to transform the way it was built and how it was run. But rebuilding wasn't just about corporate structures. It was about securing my power from within and without. After the final showdown with Ming Wei and Lian, I realized something that had always been buried beneath my father's empire. The Lin legacy wasn't just about money. It was about trust, loyalty, and control. But the Lin family had been fractured long before I came into power. Ming Wei had manipulated my father, and Lian had been a puppet on her strings. My own trust had been shattered by them, leaving a gaping wound that would have never healed had I not taken control. Now that the foundation had been cleared, I needed to build something unshakable. I started by doing what no one expected me to do. I reached out to the family. Not to Ming Wei or Lian, of course, but to the extended Lin family members who had once been loyal. The cousins, the aunts, the uncles, and the distant relatives. People who had been sidelined by Ming Wei's manipulation. people who had never had a voice. I knew that if I wanted to build a future, I needed to unite the family, not by force, but by bringing them into the fold. I wanted to show them that I wasn't the villain in this story. I was the savior of their legacy. The Lin Empire is not just my inheritance. It belongs to all of us, I told them during a gathering in our family estate. And, together, we will build it stronger than ever. They listened. They watched. Some were skeptical, but many were willing to take the risk. I formed a new family council, giving them a stake in the future of the Lin Corporation. Each family member was given shares in the company, giving them both a sense of ownership and responsibility. By the end of the meeting, I had achieved something monumental. I had secured the family's loyalty and ensured that no one could ever divide us again. While restoring family ties was important, the true work of building the dynasty lay in the corporate foundation. I had already seized control of the Lin Corporation, but to maintain it, I needed to implement long-term stability and innovation. The first step was to rebuild the leadership. I carefully selected a team of executives who were loyal, innovative, and forward-thinking. I didn't want people who were just looking for their next promotion. I wanted builders. I chose people who would respect the empire's legacy while also pushing it forward into a new era of global influence. I hired Ming Wei, a former tech mogul, to oversee the digital transformation of the company, Zhao Min, a seasoned business strategist, to head the international expansion into Southeast Asia, Shen Hui, a sustainability expert, to help the company lead in green technology. But the most important decision I made was to bring in an external board of advisors, a mix of industry leaders, legal experts, and former financial regulators, to ensure that no one could manipulate the company the way Lian and Ming Wei had. For the first time, Lin Corporation was transparent. It was secure, and it was ready for the future. One thing I had learned over the past few months was that perception is power. The media had been quick to report on the scandal and the fall of the Lin family, but it was time to rewrite the narrative. I turned to Xiao Yang, the PR strategist who had helped me before. Together, we crafted a media strategy that would change how the world saw me and the Lin Corporation. The first step was a global press conference. It would be live-streamed across multiple platforms, broadcasted on major news outlets, and streamed on social media. I wasn't just going to speak for myself. I was going to speak for the Lin legacy, for the future, and for the empire I had rebuilt from the ground up. The day of the press conference, I stood before the cameras, calm and composed, ready to face the world. The room was filled with journalists from all over the world, the air thick with anticipation. My name is Brielle Lin. For too long, the Lin family name has been associated with greed, deceit, and betrayal. But today, I stand before you to tell you that we are reclaiming that name. Lin Corporation will no longer be known for its secrets. It will be known for its integrity, its innovation, and its commitment to the future. The press room fell silent. Then came the questions. Madam Lin, what do you say to those who still doubt your leadership? I understand their doubts, but I don't need to prove anything to my enemies. I'm proving it to myself, to my family, and to the world. The Lin family is no longer about the past. It's about what we're building right now. We are here to create something better. For our people, for our children, and for our world. By the end of the conference, the narrative had shifted. I wasn't just the survivor of a family scandal. I was a leader and a visionary. While everything seemed to be falling into place, I knew that there was one last threat lurking in the shadows. Ming Wei and Lian's schemes had been exposed, but they had one last weapon they hadn't used yet: the court case. Ming Wei had filed a lawsuit against me, claiming that the family fortune was wrongfully taken and that I had embezzled funds. It was a calculated move designed to destroy my credibility and take back what they had lost. I knew that if I didn't act fast, they would use the legal system to try to chip away at my empire. I didn't hesitate. I hired the best legal team, a group of ruthless corporate lawyers who were known for their ability to win even the most impossible cases. We filed counterclaims against Ming Wei, using her offshore accounts and hidden transactions as evidence. We attacked her at every turn, destroying her reputation, discrediting her, and forcing her to settle the lawsuit for pennies on the dollar. By the time the case was over, she was nothing, just a footnote in the Lin family's history. Lian, however, was a different story. He tried to flee the country with his assets, but I had already tracked his movements. We had his passport revoked and made sure he couldn't touch a cent of the money he had stolen. With the legal battle behind me, the last thing I needed to do was make sure the Lin Corporation's future was secure. I expanded into international markets, targeting emerging economies in Africa and Latin America, where I saw incredible potential for growth. I signed new partnerships, developed cutting-edge technology in renewable energy, and continued to innovate. I focused on building a sustainable future for the company, one that would stand the test of time. Lin Corporation would no longer be just a business. It would be a legacy, a dynasty. And as I looked out over the skyline, I knew one thing for sure: this empire would never fall. Not as long as I was its queen. Power is fleeting. A moment of hesitation can cost you everything. A single misstep can crumble years of work. But the secret to lasting power isn't just in building an empire, it's in sustaining it, securing it for the future. The Lin Corporation wasn't just my inheritance anymore, it was my legacy. And I had made it clear, no one would take it from me. Not now, not ever. But now, the real challenge wasn't just defending what I had won. It was ensuring that the empire I'd rebuilt would endure. For decades. For generations. The first thing I realized, after dealing with the financial collapse my in-laws had orchestrated, was that I had a responsibility, not just to my father's memory, but to the future of Lin Corporation. In every powerful family, there's always a moment when a new ruler must secure their position. And while I had already eradicated those who had tried to tear it apart, there was still one lingering question I had to answer: who would succeed me? I had no children of my own, no heirs, no one who could continue the legacy I had fought to rebuild. I couldn't risk having the empire fall back into the hands of opportunistic relatives or corrupt outsiders. The answer was simple: I needed to build a new line of succession, and it would be built on loyalty, intelligence, and the capacity to lead with integrity. The idea of succession wasn't a light one. It wasn't something you could just give away to anyone who showed up at the right time. I began by focusing on my employees, those who had stuck by me, those who had shown they were capable of more than just climbing the corporate ladder for personal gain. They had to be people who understood the deeper values of the Lin Corporation: loyalty, innovation, and commitment to excellence. There were two people in particular who stood out: Chen Hui, the head of sustainability initiatives, and Zhao Min, the executive overseeing international expansion. Both had proven themselves invaluable to the future of the company. And most importantly, they believed in the vision I had set for the empire. They were loyal, but more importantly, they were sharp, strategic thinkers. Chen Hui was the quiet architect behind Lin Corporation's renewable energy ventures. Zhao Min had orchestrated our expansion into Southeast Asia and Africa. Both were visionaries in their own right. I called them both to my office one afternoon. "The time has come for us to talk about the future of the company," I said, closing the door behind them. "The future of our empire. I've decided it's time for me to step aside. But I'm not leaving. Not yet. I need to know who will carry the torch when I can no longer..." Their faces were unreadable, but I could sense the weight of the moment. "I believe in both of you," I continued. "The next step for Lin Corporation will not be about holding on to the past. It will be about leading the future. And I need to know, are you ready to take that mantle?" Chen Hui was the first to speak. "Madam Lin, I've spent years building the foundation for our green initiatives, but I know that this empire cannot only thrive on sustainability alone. If you trust me, I will make sure we become the global leaders in both technology and ethical business practices." Zhao Min nodded in agreement. "Our expansion into emerging markets is just the beginning. If you trust me, I will ensure Lin Corporation doesn't just dominate in Asia, but across the world." They both had the fire I was looking for. But I wasn't about to make it easy for them. I needed them to prove they were worthy. I gave them each a test. It wasn't a corporate task, it was personal. They needed to prove that they could protect the empire from the kind of betrayal I had suffered. I set up an internal rivalry. I made them both think they were in competition for the position of chief executive officer, but what they didn't know was that I wasn't actually looking for a successor from either of them. I was watching their actions, watching who would fight for what was right, and who would let ambition cloud their judgment. The test was simple. Each of them was tasked with leading an international expansion strategy. One would focus on Southeast Asia, the other on Africa. The catch was that they had to do it without me intervening. They needed to show me that they could operate under pressure in unpredictable markets and without relying on me to clean up their mistakes. Weeks passed. The competition grew fierce. Both Chen Hui and Zhao Min fought tooth and nail, putting together strategies and executing deals that made even the most seasoned executives at Lin Corporation nervous. They brought in new investors, signed key international partnerships, and made some risky investments, all to outshine the other. But in the end, it wasn't just their business acumen that determined who I would trust. It was their character. Zhao Min was brilliant, but he was too aggressive, willing to play dirty if it meant winning. His approach would likely expand the company in the short term, but at what cost? Chen Hui, on the other hand, was methodical. She was strategic, ethical, and most importantly, she understood the importance of maintaining sustainability while pushing forward. But was she ready to lead? Could she balance the weight of the empire? In the end, I made my choice. The boardroom was packed with executives, family members, and press representatives when I made the announcement. The future of Lin Corporation is secure. After careful consideration, I've chosen Chen Hui to lead the company into its next chapter. She has proven herself capable, loyal, and visionary. I trust her to take the reins and ensure that Lin Corporation remains the empire it has always been. The room fell silent for a moment. Chen Hui stood, her face unreadable. I could see the shock in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with a smile of determination. "I won't let you down, Madam Lin," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I nodded. "I know you won't." As Chen Hui took her seat as the new CEO, I knew the company was in good hands. She would carry the Lin legacy into the future, ensuring that it would remain untouchable. But I wasn't done yet. After the announcement, I met with the extended family members once again. This time, there were no questions, no challenges. I had secured my future, but more importantly, I had secured the future of the Lin Empire. It would never fall into the hands of traitors, and it would never be divided again. "We have come a long way, but this is just the beginning," I told them. "Together, we will build the empire my father dreamed of, and we will ensure that the Lin name is respected and feared for generations." The weeks that followed were filled with quiet, measured steps. I had done everything necessary to solidify my empire, but there was still one thing left to do. The final piece. To make sure the Lin legacy was never threatened again, I made one last change. I divested from the areas of the business that had been tainted by corruption, selling off the investments that were linked to Lian, Ming Wei, and the dark corners of the empire. I put those funds into philanthropy, establishing a foundation in my father's name that would support the arts, education, and sustainability efforts worldwide. This was my final message to the world. The Lin family wasn't just about power. It was about purpose. The true test of power is not in how you wield it, but in how you leave it. The Lin Empire was mine now, unquestionably mine. But in the quiet moments, as I looked out over the city from my office, the weight of that responsibility didn't fill me with pride. It filled me with a quiet, constant determination. Because I wasn't just thinking about today. I wasn't even just thinking about tomorrow. I was thinking about the next century. How could I ensure that the Lin Empire would be untouchable, unshakable, and undeniably powerful for generations to come? The legacy I had inherited was built on the blood, sweat, and tears of my ancestors, but I would be the one to ensure it thrived, not just survived. I could have stopped. I could have sat back and let the business run on autopilot. But I had learned one thing over the past few years: nothing is permanent unless you reinforce it. I began with a complete overhaul of the company's core values. Lin Corporation would no longer be a reflection of the corrupt practices I had inherited. I wanted it to be known for ethics, innovation, and sustainability. I called a company-wide meeting, every employee, from the lowest ranks to the highest. It was time to set the tone. The room was filled with people I had inherited from the old regime, people who had once sworn allegiance to my stepmother, Ming Wei, and my treacherous ex-husband, Lian. They had their doubts. I could feel it in the air. But I didn't let that intimidate me. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter in the history of Lin Corporation. We are no longer just a business. We are a legacy that will stand for integrity, for innovation, and for the future. We will build something that will last. We will build something that cannot be undone. I watched their faces carefully. I could see the skepticism, the uncertainty. But I also saw hope, a flicker of belief in the future. While the corporate restructuring was well underway, I knew that to build a lasting legacy, I needed to invest in the future, not just the business world, but also society. It was time to establish a foundation that would ensure the Lin name wasn't just associated with wealth, but with purpose. I created the Lin Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to sustainable business practices, education for underprivileged youth, and environmental conservation. But it wasn't just about charity. It was about shaping the future. The Lin Foundation would fund initiatives that aligned with the values I wanted to instill in future generations. By combining social good with business strategy, I ensured that the Lin name would be synonymous with responsibility, not just profit. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore: the future of the empire, the next generation. As I watched the company grow, I realized I didn't just need to secure my power. I needed to secure the future of the Lin Dynasty. And that meant I needed to think about succession beyond just my immediate family. I began working on a succession plan, one that would ensure the Lin Empire remained intact, no matter what. The first thing I did was bring in a group of young, talented heirs, the children of key executives, employees who had shown great promise in the company. I wanted to mentor them, give them the opportunity to prove themselves, and groom them for future leadership roles. It wasn't just about passing the torch, it was about ensuring that the right hands held it. I knew the dangers of unchecked power, and I wasn't about to let anyone fall victim to greed or self-interest. I took these young leaders under my wing, teaching them the ways of the Lin Empire, how to think strategically, how to lead with integrity, and how to understand the deep roots of corporate responsibility. The Lin Corporation would be passed down not just as a business, but as a legacy of values. Those values would be preserved, protected, and passed on with pride. While I focused on the internal workings of the empire, I also recognized the importance of public perception. The media could build you up, or they could tear you down. I had learned the hard way how dangerous the media could be, but now I knew how to use it to my advantage. I restructured Lin Corporation's entire brand. Gone were the old, outdated images of excess. In their place, I created a new narrative, one of sustainability, innovation, and responsibility. I launched a global campaign, showcasing the work we were doing with the Lin Foundation, our cutting-edge renewable energy projects, and our commitment to environmental conservation. We didn't just talk about our values, we showed them. We demonstrated our commitment by investing in green technologies, supporting startups focused on sustainable business, and ensuring our products had a minimal environmental footprint. The world started to see the Lin name in a new light, not just as a family of wealth and power, but as a beacon of hope for a better future. While Lin Corporation was becoming the company of the future, there were still external threats. Rivals who saw my success as a threat, competitors who wanted a piece of the empire. But I had learned the most important lesson of all: there is no peace in power. There is only constant vigilance. To cement the future of Lin Corporation, I made a bold decision. I started acquiring strategic companies, businesses that would complement Lin Corporation's long-term vision. I didn't just want to expand, I wanted to dominate. I made a move to acquire a large stake in Tech, a high-tech company in artificial intelligence that had been the subject of several hostile takeover bids. I didn't just buy them out, I merged them into Lin Corporation. I then secured a deal with Elysium Industries, a global leader in energy solutions, ensuring that Lin Corporation would become a world leader in green technology. The acquisitions were clean, methodical, and calculated. By the time the deals were complete, Lin Corporation had solidified its place in several new industries: technology, energy, and even philanthropy. But the final act of consolidation was something I hadn't expected: a personal alliance. I reached out to Li Wei, a longtime family ally and one of China's wealthiest businessmen. He had always respected my father, and after careful negotiation, I forged a partnership with him that would span decades. Together, we created a global network of companies that shared the same values, ensuring that Lin Corporation's influence would extend beyond China and into Europe and North America. As the dust settled and I looked over the empire I had built, I realized something. The Lin Dynasty was not just mine to rule, it was mine to protect. I had created something that was bigger than myself, something that would last for generations. Lin Corporation would be the example of what true leadership looked like, a company that wasn't just focused on profit, but on creating a better world. A world where power wasn't about dominance, but about responsibility. I had outlived my enemies. I had rebuilt my family. And I had secured the future. Madame Lin was more than just a title. It was a legacy. And it was mine. There's a saying that goes, the higher you rise, the harder you fall. But in my case, the higher I rose, the stronger my foundation became. The Lin Dynasty wasn't built on arrogance or brute force. It was built on strategy, foresight, and the kind of resilience that allowed it to weather the storms of betrayal, loss, and deceit. The empire I had inherited was no longer the fragile thing my stepmother and ex-husband had tried to steal. It wasn't a hollow name that echoed in empty halls. It was a force, a legacy that would transcend generations. And the time had come to ensure that it remained untouchable, secure, and unshakable. It's one thing to fight for what's yours. It's another to carry the weight of an empire on your shoulders. I had spent the last few years rebuilding, restructuring, and reclaiming the Lin Corporation piece by piece. Every decision I made had been calculated. Every acquisition, every move was a piece of the puzzle. But now, as I sat in the CEO's chair in the glass-walled office overlooking the Shanghai skyline, I understood the gravity of my role. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about power. This was about ensuring that the Lin legacy would endure, that it would stand as a symbol of integrity and innovation for centuries to come. It was about ensuring that my children, and their children, would inherit an empire that wasn't tainted by greed or deceit, but built on the pillars of sustainability, philanthropy, and global leadership. But that meant one thing. I needed to pass it on. In the quiet moments after meetings, when the office lights dimmed and the weight of the day settled in, I thought about my family's future. I had no children of my own, yet. I had no heir to carry on my vision, no one to follow in my footsteps. I had spent so much time fighting for the empire that I had forgotten the most important thing: the future. The dynasty. I knew that the legacy of Lin Corporation couldn't rest solely on my shoulders forever. It was time to build the next generation. I decided to adopt. Not just any child, but a child who would understand the weight of the empire and grow up with the lessons of both the Lin family's honor and my own principles. I chose Li Xiaoran, the son of a close family friend. He was bright, perceptive, and his parents were loyal, ethical people who I knew would ensure he grew up with the right values. The adoption wasn't just symbolic. It was strategic. Li Xiaoran would inherit the Lin Corporation, but he would do so with the guidance of a legacy of strength, a legacy of loyalty, and a legacy of integrity. He would grow up knowing what it meant to be Madame Lin's heir. He would learn the sacrifices it took to rebuild the empire. And he would know the responsibility of carrying the Lin name forward. The next step in securing my legacy was establishing the Lin Legacy Trust, a foundation designed not just to protect the family's wealth, but to ensure that it was used for good. Created a board of directors, people I trusted, but also people with the vision and integrity to uphold the values I had worked so hard to instill. The Lin Legacy Trust would fund global initiatives in renewable energy, education for underprivileged children, and medical research. I wanted the Lin name to be associated with positive change, not just corporate success. I wanted to ensure that future generations wouldn't just inherit wealth, but would also be tasked with ensuring that the world was a better place for everyone. As I looked at Li Xiaoran, standing tall next to me in a meeting with the board of directors, I knew I had made the right decision. He was ready. He had the intelligence, the drive, and the understanding of the company's vision. But more importantly, he had something the others didn't. He had the humility to know that he wasn't inheriting just a business. He was inheriting a legacy. At the Lin Corporation's annual gala, I stood at the podium and announced to the world what I had known in my heart for a long time. The Lin Dynasty has always been more than just a company. It has been a force that changes the world. And today, I am proud to announce that the future of the Lin Corporation and the future of our family lies in the hands of Li Xiaoran. The applause was thunderous. Li Xiaoran stood at my side, his face a mask of pride, but also of resolve. The world watched as the transition was made official. And in that moment, I knew that I had secured the future. But even as I secured the future, I knew there was one final threat to face: Ming Wei and Lian. They had been silenced for now, but their ambition had never truly been extinguished. I had made sure they were stripped of their wealth, their power, and their influence, but I knew they wouldn't go quietly into the night. I wasn't prepared for them to just fade away. I knew they would strike back. They did. But not in the way I expected. I received a call one afternoon. The voice on the other end was cold, distant. "You think you've won, Brielle. But the Lin Empire was never yours. It belongs to me, and I will make sure you fall." It was Ming Wei. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to. I had prepared for this. I had prepared for them to try and take back what was mine. I had a final decisive move ready. I took them to court. I exposed the depth of their financial crimes in the public eye, using every piece of evidence I had gathered over the years. Ming Wei's manipulation, Lian's deceit, and their efforts to siphon off the Lin wealth were laid bare for everyone to see. They had nowhere to hide. The public turned against them. The media labeled them as the true villains. Their reputations were destroyed. Their wealth was confiscated. And when it was all said and done, Ming Wei and Lian had lost everything. They had nothing left to stand on. No legacy. No empire. And I watched them fall. With the final threats vanquished, I knew it was time for the final step. I looked at Li Xiaoran, standing beside me in the grand office of the Lin Corporation. It was his time to lead. But it would always be my time to guide. We would lead together. The Lin Corporation was now a global powerhouse, its influence stretching across continents. But more than that, it was a symbol of what could be built when integrity and vision met with the strength to overcome any obstacle. And as I stood at the window, watching the world below, I knew one thing for sure. The Lin Empire was no longer just a business. It was a dynasty. And I was its queen. A dynasty isn't built on a single person's dreams. It's built on the dreams of generations. It's built on sacrifice, strategy, and unwavering resolve. When I first walked into the Lin Corporation, I was a woman scorned, a widow in the eyes of the world. But when I walked out of that same office years later, I wasn't just a survivor. I was the architect of a future no one could ever take from me. The Lin Dynasty was no longer about one woman's quest for revenge. It was about preserving what we had built for the world, for future generations, and for those who believed in something greater than wealth. Lin Corporation had become more than just a company. It had become a beacon, a symbol. After the dust settled, the media stopped speculating about my personal life. No longer was I a subject of gossip or scandal. I had redefined my image as the leader of a company that was committed to social responsibility, sustainability, and innovation. But more importantly, I had created a legacy that would endure. I took a step back from day-to-day operations, passing the reins to Li Xiaoran, my adopted son, my heir, and now the CEO of Lin Corporation. He was ready. He had earned it. The company was in good hands, but this was my empire, my vision, and I wasn't going to disappear. I became the chairwoman, a position of oversight, not interference. I remained a figurehead, guiding the company from the shadows but never relinquishing my position as the true matriarch of the Lin Dynasty. Under Li Xiaoran's leadership, Lin Corporation flourished in ways I hadn't imagined. We didn't just dominate the industries we already controlled, we expanded. Lin Corporation became a global beacon of innovation, with a presence in North America, Europe, Southeast Asia, and Africa. We focused on cutting-edge technologies, AI, clean energy, and medical research, ensuring that Lin Corporation was not only profitable, but was pushing boundaries that no one had ever imagined before. From revolutionizing how the world approached sustainable urban planning to leading global digital transformation in finance, we were no longer just an empire built on tradition. We were a force for good, and that was more important than any balance sheet. To ensure the eternal preservation of our empire, I created the Lin Legacy Trust, a foundation dedicated not only to safeguarding the Lin assets, but also to ensuring that future generations would have the resources and guidance to continue the work I had begun. The Lin Legacy Trust didn't just allocate funds. It was a living, breathing entity that would ensure every Lin family member understood their role in the corporation. The foundation would sponsor education, global outreach programs, and fund sustainable projects for future innovators. But most importantly, it ensured that our family's wealth was used to build something much bigger than ourselves, an enduring empire that valued ethics, humanity, and advancement. The Lin family, once fractured by ambition and greed, had now become a unified front. I had rebuilt the family and the business, and together we were stronger than ever. Li Xiaoran was now the father of my grandchildren, children I had the privilege of raising. My family wasn't just an heirloom of the past, they were the future of Lin Corporation. I watched my grandchildren grow, each one taking on roles within the business, each one taking on responsibility. But they weren't just inheriting power, they were inheriting values, respect, and purpose. I had always been driven by a singular goal: to leave the world better than I found it. But as I watched my family take charge, I knew the Lin Dynasty would endure. One afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat at the table where my father used to sit. Li Xiaoran and his wife joined me, their children running around the garden outside. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, to let the weight of everything I had accomplished settle in. But I knew I couldn't rest. Not yet. There were new threats. People who would always look at the Lin Empire and wonder if there was a crack in the wall they could exploit. There were always rivals, always opportunists. But now, I was more than just the founder. I was the protector, the guardian of the dynasty. I handed Li Xiaoran a letter. It was a document that had been sitting in my desk for years, a final testament to everything I had built. "This is the future of the Lin Dynasty," I said, my voice steady. "The Lin Corporation will survive not because of any one person's effort, but because it is rooted in something greater than any of us. This is your responsibility now." Li Xiaoran nodded, understanding the weight of the words I had written. He had inherited more than just the company. He had inherited my vision. Time passed. The Lin Empire grew. The dynasty thrived. As the years went by, I stepped back from the day-to-day operations, letting Li Xiaoran and his children take charge. But I knew that for them I would always be the matriarch, the one who had rebuilt what was broken and made it unshakable. As the sun began to set one evening, with my family gathered around me, I realized something. The Lin Empire wasn't mine to keep, it was mine to pass on. And I had done just that. The Lin Dynasty was secure. It was eternal. As I looked at my children, my grandchildren, and my great-grandchildren, I saw the future that was never going to stop. The legacy I had created would continue, and the empire I had built would last for generations to come. The final victory wasn't about taking back what was mine. It was about building something that could never be stolen again. The Lin Dynasty was now more than just a name. It was a symbol of strength, resilience, and the power to rise from the ashes. As I took my seat in the garden, surrounded by my loved ones, I closed my eyes for a moment. For the first time in years, I could finally rest. The empire was in safe hands, and I had won. Years after my passing, the Lin Empire remains one of the world's most influential and respected corporations. The next generations of the Lin family, guided by the principles I instilled in them, have carried the torch forward, ensuring that the Lin name is known not just for its wealth, but for its integrity, its innovation, and its commitment to making the world a better place. And through it all, I remain in their hearts, the woman who rose from the ashes and cemented the future of the Lin Dynasty for all time.